Hello, and welcome to the Project Good podcast. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Hilton. Project Good is a social impact podcast interviewing experts and advocates about pressing problems that we face globally and hearing how they suggest we move forward in the future. The Project Good podcast is brought to you by Project Good Work. The goal of this podcast is to inspire people and organizations to develop a mindset that can move others to positive action regarding the complex social issues facing people on the planet. For February, we have a special edition with Hans Hageman, discussing Renaissance and Changemaking. Hans is a social entrepreneur. He has developed visionary solutions to improve education from Harlem to India. Hans grew up in Spanish Harlem, New York. His home was Exodus House, a pioneering residential drug treatment center started by his father. Hans' parents were his first teachers in the importance of service to others. He went on to attend Princeton University and Columbia University School of Law. After law school, he went on to work as a prosecutor, chief counsel to U.S. Senate subcommittee, and as a defense attorney. In the 90s, he shifted his mission to work with children who have been underserved by the educational system. This led him to founding the East Harlem School at Exodus, an independent school that predated charter schools or charter legislation in New York City. His work there was honored by Essence magazine through an Essence Award, the Robin Hood Foundation. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Hans, who is a Renaissance changemaker, immersing himself in many fields and lending his knowledge and heart to a plethora of causes. Hans has experienced and been seen in a number of social change movements, which have shaped his dynamic movement of change. Let's get into the interview. Hans has been honored with an Essence Magazine Award and the Robin Hood Foundation Heroes Award. It has brought him national media coverage from CNN, the New York Times, People magazine, and the major television networks. He has worked in law, education, personal development, health, and the nonprofit space, and knows more than a thing or two about bringing and implementing change in organizations, people, and the world. Today, we reflect on the continuous life work of Hans, the current executive director at the Tutwiler Communication Education Center, and we will learn how to push ourselves to be the best change makers we are meant to be. Welcome, Hans.
Hi, Anne-Marie. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Hi. I'm looking forward to our conversation as well, and I'm excited about this conversation because you have, experienced so much in life. I guess I would say, of course, you're living in your body, but from what I have, learned about you, you have really what I would say lived, right? A lot of times people think that just living is about, enjoying and traveling, but the truth is, I think that you have shown that living means really, getting involved and not just being like, self-concerned. So in today's world, that's very hard to find as we see that, we have everything from social media to the rise of narcissism and just, people isolating and becoming self-contained. And so for you to be a person who has decided to, spread everything that you have learned in life, it's inspiring. And so that's why I was looking forward to interviewing you the most. So before we get into the interview questions, I always like to have a little fun with guests and get to know them a little personally by asking them a question about themselves. So that they can think a little bit deeply at who they are. So what would you say is driving you in the second half of your life?
My motto is becoming an ancestor worth remembering. And it's gone fast, Anne-Marie. I still have to remind myself. I hear a story about somebody in their 60s, and I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm going to be different when I'm that age. I'm like, hold it, wait, you're 65. What are you talking about? And I realize I'm in the last quarter, and I that's emphasized when I'm around the young people that I work with, and so it's moving as hard as I can into making this final act perhaps my best act.
I don't know. I didn't mean to scare you by saying second half, because these days, people, you probably have another 40, maybe 50 years. You never know the way that technology and life goes these days. A lot of people make it to 100.
Right.
So you might just be still, still in the baby moments.
I'm hoping.
Yes.
But there's still a lot of work to be done, and there's still a lot of work to be done, and I'm in the Mississippi Delta, and I still have my New York energy, and so I try not to overwhelm people with that while I'm down here. But a lot of who I am and why I do what I do was created in that kind of cauldron of New York City.
Yes, but I think I've only been to Mississippi a few times during what I was doing was a vacation. So I guess I was there already in a slow pace. But I think, sometimes having that, of course, I've always lived in semi-fast cities, is a great motivator for people. At least that's what I think. Not living in a slower paced life. So I think that's wonderful. So let's, I guess, introduce you to the audience and tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Hans Hageman? Who are you? Who were you? And who do you hope to be?
Well, when you were talking about me, I really felt like I had been seen, because from early on, I have tried to be a part of the times that I've been in, and it's been everything from looking out the housing project windows in East Harlem and watching President Kennedy and the astronaut John Glenn go by, to waiting at home for my father to come back from yet another protest that he was engaging in with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's having a mentor who's moving on in age, but who's very important to me when talking about things like policing in the United States. He was a former speechwriter for Bobby Kennedy. It's being at Princeton University, a place of tremendous privilege and people with tremendous wealth and achievement, students coming in, but saying, you know what, I'm glad I'm here, but I can't just sit back. There are things that I need to do beyond becoming, quote, a Princeton graduate. And so what that included was becoming a part of the Big Brother, Big Sister program. My freshman year, I'm actually still in touch with the young man who had been in a residential facility at the time when I was his big brother. He found me after decades. And so we're back in touch. But also it was joining Princeton's ROTC. This was post-Vietnam. The military was not a real wonderful option for anybody just because of what had happened during Vietnam. And certainly if you were at Princeton, why were you a part of ROTC? And part of it was because I had always been taught that you have a responsibility to something larger than yourself. It's not enough to say that I have this Princeton degree or Columbia University School of Law degree, and that's going to open doors, and I'm sure I'll do some good along the way. It had to be more affirmative for me. And so I was a member of Princeton's ROTC, and one of my pals was the recently retired chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, and we spent many hours in the woods around Princeton together. I went to the 101st Air Mobile Division Training School in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Didn't need to do that either. And that required, among other things, rappelling out of helicopters perched 100 feet in the air and having a fear of heights. That wasn't the most natural move for me to make. But again, whether it was the ROTC, whether it was becoming part of the Big Brothers, Big Sisters, whether it was becoming an active participant in getting Princeton to divest its investments in the then apartheid government of South Africa, I was taught to never just sit on the sidelines. My mother, who was an activist in the community, set that example. My father, who, as I had mentioned, in addition to marching with Dr. King, had created this residential drug treatment center, and where both he and my mother taught me the power of redemption and faith and service in the lives of other people. There was no other way I could go than to a life of service. And it's not for everybody. I think more people certainly have space in their lives to figure out who they are beyond their own narrow concerns. And as you mentioned, it's tougher to do that with the advent of social media, AI, and other things today, and the political divisions that we see in the country. But I still think it's imperative, if we're going to survive as a society, for people to look beyond themselves and say, what is my responsibility here, particularly to those of us who have been given so much. I grew up, we were not wealthy by any means, lower middle class most likely. I remember some of the hand-me-down clothes that were actually of very good quality, but that I got made fun of for wearing. But again, that's part of who I was. But because I also knew how incredibly privileged I was to be on scholarship to an elite private school that then allowed me to take that next step to a Princeton, that allowed me to take that next step to a Columbia University. And that's also played out in my professional life. And so that's led me on a path to starting. When I began, I was convinced, I think, about the age of 8. And I think the book was The Lawyers or something by a Martin Mayer, who actually had been a friend of my parents. And he gave me a signed copy of this big book that he had written on being a lawyer. And hardcover book. I eventually read it, but certainly at 8 years old, I wasn't going to read it. But I knew that I'd seen the struggles my parents had in terms of the work that they were doing. But I was going to take a different path and use the law to right the wrongs that my parents had been trying to right. And so I stuck to that path. And as you had mentioned, I had a number of different roles in the law, and I wanted to see where would I be able to make the most difference. And I'm glad I was where in each of those places. I'm glad I got to see how laws are made in the U.S. Senate. It was a little disappointing, certainly eye-opening. I'm glad I worked as a prosecutor in Robert Morgenthau, who was a legendary prosecutor in New York and nationally. I was glad to be a prosecutor in his office. And I'm also glad that I was able to work as a public defender. And if I hadn't been in each of those positions, then there were lives that I wouldn't have been able to positively affect. But at some point I said, no, I've got to take myself off to the side a little bit and have more of an impact on how the system operates. And I couldn't do that, in my opinion, by being so deeply involved in the system. And so that led to the creation of an independent school that I co-founded with my brother, that he runs 30 plus years now. Then it was in a building that had been the residential drug treatment center, requiring a lot of maintenance. I had to take care of rat patrol. I had to clear up faulty boilers because we couldn't necessarily afford plumbers and electricians and so forth. So I had to do whatever I could do there. I cooked 2 hot meals a day. I taught classes. I did the fundraising. I put the board together. And this was also a time where there were 2,400 homicides in New York, mainly because of the crack epidemic. And at one point early in our career at that school, my brother and I had death threats taken out against us because we were interfering with the drug traffic on the block by having a school. I hadn't considered that. I knew it was going to be hard opening a school. Again, as you had mentioned, it predated charter legislation in New York, so this was a first impression to a number of people. And trying to fundraise for something like this, I had friends who stopped talking to me because I was no longer a lawyer. I had been defined by my status, my professional status, and found to be lacking when I decided I was going to be an educator. So I was starting from way back. And then you have these death threats. And so a few years, I was licensed by the New York City Police Department within 2 weeks to carry a handgun to protect myself. And there were times I would sit at the end of the school day, and my days were long. 6 in the morning, and I would leave around 7 at night. And a couple of times I would leave in tears because I didn't know if I was going to make it home to see my then infant daughter. And I would have people across the street openly sporting firearms, laughing, saying, you know, one of these days you're not going to make it home. And then having to come back the next day and do it all over again and be there for the children, be there for donors who wanted to hear about wonderful things that were going to happen. And I had to learn how to keep it together very quickly. And so early on, I had to teach myself about self-care, and whether it was learning about John Kabat-Zinn's work, getting certified as an Ashtanga yoga teacher by one of the Western original yogis, David Swenson, whether it was becoming a Reiki master under a guy named William Lee Rand, becoming certified in hypnosis. I mean, all of this is in the 90s, the early 90s, before it became that popular. And certainly not in my neighborhood of East Harlem. But all of those things were tools that I needed to move past that. And as I said, the school evolved. It's in a brand new multi-million-dollar building that then Mayor Bloomberg broke ground on. And after 9 years there, I moved on to a larger nonprofit that was in distress, 350 employees serving thousands of kids, but whose executive director had died very suddenly from pancreatic cancer. And they had an interim who they had brought from the corporate world. The board then consisted of a lot of wealthy masters of the universe who felt that if they brought in a corporate figure, that he would be able to fix whatever was wrong with the organization. That didn't turn out to be the case. And so I went there for 7 years, had a great time, made some wonderful relationships there. And now here I am in the Mississippi Delta, a place I never thought I would find myself, and a place where people who knew me just are still having a hard time wrapping their head around. But I'm glad I'm here.
Wow, you know, you went from in my mind when you were first telling Maurice your story as a child. I was picturing you, and I guess don't laugh, but I guess it kind of goes along. Is that, you know, for you're sort of like a preacher's kid. And what I mean by that is that when, you know, children that their parents are pastors and preachers, they grow up, they're kind of, you know, pushed and forced into these spots. And they either go two ways. Either they decide, okay, I'm going to go with the flow, and this is, you know, I guess how our family is shaped and become, you know, part of the ministry, or they decide I'm going to become a wild rock star and, you know, run off and do all the things that I was not allowed to do. And so, you know, that's how I guess I picture your start. And then the fact that you, I guess in a way, as you were saying, you were kind of groomed into that, but you decided to choose that. And so that is always, you know, I guess amazing for someone to choose that path, because I really do believe when you are raised by parents that have such a focus on service, it is, you know, it's hard sometimes to comprehend as a child because, you know, not that children are purposely, but they don't understand because they're growing. Those are the times where you're just like, you know, but what about me and what I want? And so that, you know, already speaks to how amazing you are as a person, that you just naturally had those seeds in you and decided to move in that direction. Even if you were, you know, surrounded by it, because the truth is you didn't have to go that route. And, you know, I find it amazing because you also, I also started picturing the thought of a war zone, right? And I was picturing a war zone because this is, hard to believe, but this is America. As they always say, this is America. But it sounds like you went through a war zone just in your own backyard. And all the different things that you encountered and the things you've learned. And I guess we're seeing it in real time now on the television, the things that were hidden, that people didn't know about, the difficulties of struggle, of change, of the people who are trying to do something positive, but the, unbelievable or sometimes strange obstacles that come against them when they are trying to actually do something good. And I was just amazed that, you had to go through all those difficulties in a school. And definitely, I would never have thought about, drugs and being, a barrier that you would have to deal with. So all I can say is, wow, you've been through a war and some.
Well, I actually, it was a funny with the drug family that ran the business. At one point, for a variety of reasons, they asked to set up a meeting with me, and that was negotiated by a police officer who also grew up in the community. He was one of 4 kids raised by a single dad who had been a Vietnam veteran. This guy was a hero cop, and that's a whole nother story. But so we set the meeting, and the head of the family said, well, what do you want? He says, we've been getting a lot of pressure from the cops, and from the black Muslims as well, who reached out and said, look, we know your father was white. My mother was an African-American who came up in the Great Migration, and she and my father fell in love in Chicago. He was a white man from Nebraska in a time when it was illegal to do that. And 96% of people felt there was something immoral about interracial marriages. But that's who they were. But black Muslims had reached out to us and said, we understand you're going through some problems with the drug dealing on your block. We are going to put out the word that we will soldier on that block until they back off. So I had been an assistant DA. I had cops that I had worked with. I had boxed in a tournament for a police officer, Stephen McDonald, who had been shot and wounded, who had forgiven the teenager who had done that to him and put him in a wheelchair. But he needed medical expenses, and I was the only civilian who boxed in that tournament to raise funds for his medical treatment. And so there were cops who were saying, you know what, off duty, we're also going to put out the word. So there was all this pressure on the drug gang on the block. So they had this meeting, and I said, look, all we want is for you to back off. You can't sell drugs during operation of our school hours, and you need to take the death threats off. And the guy said, done. And to his credit, we never, for the next several years, we never had any problems. And the head of that family actually ended up going to prison about 6 years later. And when I was in my new job at that large nonprofit that I had mentioned, I got a call from a federal institution. And it was this guy who had run the family drug business on the block. And he says, look, he says, I know that we went through a lot of change and pain. And he says, but I got nobody in my life now. He says, you can imagine, right? I had the money, I had everything. I've got nothing now, and my own family has rejected me. I've got nobody to write to. I've got nobody to put money in my commissary. He said, this is crazy, but if you could just write me once a month and put a couple of dollars in my commissary, he said, I'll never forget it. And that's what I did. And we stayed in touch as pen pals for the next few years. And then I got word from him that he was getting out, and he was going to buy me dinner anywhere I wanted. But he first had business in Miami to take care of. We never had that dinner. He was shot and killed in Miami. But it was a rough time back then, and I had learned about post-traumatic growth, figuring out how to move forward early on. I remember coming home from high school happy about a track meet. I guess it was 9th or 10th grade, where I had done fairly well. And I was getting off the subway, walking home. I saw these clouds of smoke, and I'm like, oh man, summertime and somebody's house is burning. Well, turns out it was my house that had burned down, probably arson. And my parents didn't miss a beat, and I still think back to why I wasn't traumatized by coming home from this elite private school where it was tough enough just to keep up, and now your house is burned down with your books and your keepsakes and all of that stuff. But my parents made that kind of thing seamless, and it went back even earlier than that. They were told by friends about a doctor at Rockefeller University who was providing care for families who wanted top-notch medical care for their kids but couldn't afford it, and this doctor's providing it for free. I became one of this doctor's patients. It was later discovered that this doctor was a serial pedophile, and he made the newspaper, and it's something that I had to keep to myself for a long time. But that at an early age, as a preteen, I had made the decision that I was going to be one adult, that no matter what any child's circumstances were, I was going to be one adult that child would be able to trust, because this medical professional had betrayed me, somebody that you don't think that's not supposed to happen, right? And my parents, as I said, taught us about post-traumatic growth, taught us about sacred wounds, taught us about how do you move forward, and they taught us about understanding the virtues that we needed to develop and cherish, such as love, courage, wisdom, self-discipline or self-mastery, as opposed to just serving one's self. So all of that goes into the background as well.
Wow, I don't know your parents, but they sound amazing. Your parents were very much, I guess you would say, they were, I guess, ahead of their time, because all the things that you're talking about are the things that now, parents think about teaching their children. So, yes, you had, I guess you would say, amazing roots or starting or a foundation. Now, I wanted to start to see how can people learn from all the different things that you have been through and start to push themselves to be the change makers that they wish to be. Or I think that we are in a time that everybody kind of needs to be a change maker. There's no choice. Sort of like what you had, it was just that you were pushed into that direction. And I think we are definitely in that time where people don't have a choice, that we need to be change makers, whatever avenue that sparks our interest, whether that's, for social types of issues, the environment, personal or spiritual growth, that everybody has to, pick their assignment and get to work. That's what I think that where we are right now. Hello, everyone. It's Anne-Marie from the Project Good podcast. Change always starts somewhere. Reach people who care about what you care about. Advertise on the Project Good podcast today by contacting us at projectgood.work/podcast. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is that how can people get past, I think the biggest thing that keeps coming up for people is that they have all these social barriers that they have in their minds, or sometimes it's not even their minds, that they see that in society. Because that's the thing that I see that is played out a lot in the media. So we know that there's all these problems that need fixes and changes and help. But then there's also this element of people having, I guess for lack of better term, kind of a mental breakdown of the personal trauma that they have experienced from people in society. So how do we get past that, that barrier that each of us is facing internally to start to become the best version? That's a big question.
Fun.
I know.
And as I had mentioned, I learned early on, around 91 or 92, that I needed to figure out how to, the saying is, put on your own oxygen mask before you put it on anybody else, right? That's the instruction they give you on the airplane. And I had been giving so much to young people, and I found it taking a toll on me. And I needed to figure out, what does that oxygen mask look like for me? And so it was that group of self-care practices. Everyone needs to have a self-care practice. If you don't, you're not going to make it very far, no matter what your intentions are. And I still find myself having to catch myself and making sure my oxygen mask is on first. And so I have a daily practice of breath work. I'm a certified breathwork coach. I created a breathwork coach training program in a maximum security prison for teenage boys, because these were young people who had taken from society, and we first needed to get them to figure out for themselves who they needed to be and understand whatever trauma they were holding. And the best way to do that is through the breath. Meditation isn't necessarily for everybody. Breath work is an accessible option for just about anybody. So having that, then understanding, what are the things that you value? Early on, if people say, what's most important to you? The top three things I would be able to name would be freedom, service, and creativity. And so if any endeavor I was looking to get into didn't include at least two of those three, and ideally all three, and the older I get, the more I look for all three to be included, and that's no negotiation on that, the better off people will be. Most people move through life unconsciously, and they're not conscious of the pain that they're feeling. They just know that there's something there that's blocking them. They don't know what are the things that they value the most. They don't understand the concept of virtue. There's one of the things that's particularly troubling is the lack of gratitude that pervades society at every level. And so early on, developing a gratitude practice. I'm part of a group. There's this woman named Danielle Laporte, and there was a time where I was just going through some very tough times. And there were two people that I looked to online, and I've since become friendly with one of them. Danielle Laporte's one of them. And she had a program that talked about looking at the virtues that you should embrace, doing an inventory emotionally and growing from that. And so it was Danielle Laporte and then this survivalist guy who's a duck farmer out west. I mean, so it was a strange combination, but too often people operate in an echo chamber, and they don't. There's not the idea lab that I grew up in. My parents, and it's some people would say it's a curse. I think it's a blessing. Early on, my parents, we would have hand down clothes, but any book we wanted, it didn't matter if it didn't make, like, why are you getting this book that's way beyond your reading level? You have this book in they would buy us books. It didn't matter, and that was always open. And so I had a library that until I moved to Mississippi was, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 books. I sold and gave away some. I still have over 1,000 books that I brought down to Mississippi. And so it was an idea lab that I grew up in. But people too often now operate in an echo chamber. They surround themselves with influences and energy that are the same as the stuck energy that they're operating in. And who was it? Einstein or whoever said, you're not going to change a problem with the same thinking that got you there in the first place, something to that effect. You need to figure out a way to step outside of that. Nutrition, right, is another thing that early on, both for myself and for the kids that I was working with, to this day at the school that I started with my brother, they still serve vegetarian meals, very healthy meals. I'm not a vegetarian. I was never a vegetarian, but we wanted to shake up the diet of the kids who we were working with. And so we would go the extra mile. And at the time, there weren't a lot of options. It was the local Korean market where we would have access to fresh vegetables and so forth. And we would try to make it culturally relevant. Most of the families were Black or Puerto Rican. And so we would ask, and we had Rastafarian families. And so we would ask them to come in and help pitch in and make healthy, nutritious meals for lunch or for special events. And it's something that always stayed with those children. It's something that I'm trying to bring down here. The place in where I am in Tallahatchie County is a remote rural region designated by the USDA. The USDA also designates it as a food desert. So you are not going to be at your spiritual, energetic best if you are putting in substances that are less than healthy. So there are a number of practices. Being clear about who you are through, and there's something called the VIA Institute, VIA Institute, where people can go and they can get an inventory after a survey based on the virtues that they embrace. And being able to step back and taking a look at who you are is a start. Having a wellness routine, eating healthfully, which is part of that wellness routine, developing a morning practice, bookending your day with an evening practice where you wind down, where you take yourself off social media, where you reflect, take yourself out of areas where you are engaged in an echo chamber where everybody's repeating the same thing. It becomes a dogma. There's no nuance. There's no sophistication. There's no compassion for other ideas. You need to get out of those situations as well. Those are just some of the things that I would suggest. And so you have to know who you are. And when you know who you are, you'll begin to understand how you're supposed to act in the world. People are told to look for balance in life. I know, look for satisfaction, look for harmony. If you're passionate and making a difference, sometimes balance is going to be out the window. And so those are just some of the things I would suggest.
Those are wonderful suggestions. And actually, you're hitting on things that I think people are just becoming attuned to. And why I say that in all the, popular, magazines, and of course, well, I guess self-help has been saying that for a long time. It's just, I guess, if people decide to pick it up or not. Magazines that are popular are now saying these things that you have mentioned of, really getting to know who you are. And I think a lot of people, they're scared. They're scared to really take that deep look in the mirror and take that deep dive. But I think if we would have done that a long time ago, that we wouldn't have gotten to that situation, the situation we're in. And well, I think the whole pandemic, I guess, made you look at the mirror sometimes literally because there was nobody else to see, and really spend that time with yourself. And it made people freak out, to say for the best way I can put it is that people have just been freaking out because they realized they didn't like what was reflecting back to them for themselves and society. And so, as a change maker who has touched so many different things, you've touched law, you've touched education. You've touched self-development. What would you say is your, I guess, the thing that you're most proud of, or the thing that you think has made the greatest impact on you and maybe other people?
Well, Anne-Marie, I have to be careful with that because, first of all, I'm old, right? So there have been a few things, and so one, of course, is the school that's in its third decade, and the number of lives. And I see that on social media. I see it with the young people who went through and are still in contact. And I'll ask people, just because I try to get a gauge, how many of you stay in touch with your middle school head of school 30 years later, right? And the numbers aren't huge, right? So I get to see that immediately. But then there's some other things. I mean, one is I had started a girls' school in the 90s, late 90s, in India for lower caste Hindu and Muslim girls. And it was hard to keep it going. And one of the reasons it was hard to keep going is when I would ask people for funding, they would either say, and I get it, you know what, no, our giving is in New York or the United States or whatever. Or they would ask, well, where are those girls going to university? And we didn't have, me and my local partner, we didn't have an answer for that local university piece, because these were girls, some preteen, who we were keeping from marriage, child marriage to grown men, who we were taking out of poverty by giving them basic literacy and numeracy skills so that they could then move up in a factory job. I'm part of a group that is mainly comprised of women who have been burned with acid because of violations of whatever marital rules happen in these lower caste areas, right? And so we worked with dozens of young girls. Maybe there's some that we had to eventually close it because my head of school had become a grandmother, and we were also getting increasing threats from Hindu and Muslim fundamentalists about the fact that we were educating not just girls, but lower caste girls and Hindu and Muslim girls together. And so I decided I can't put you, my local partner, at risk. We need to shut it down. But during that time, we changed dozens of girls' lives. And so, how do you measure that? I'm not sure. I started an independent high school for kids who had dropped out of public high school. When I moved on to that larger nonprofit, got a generous $1 million gift to get that started. And I'm still in touch with those young people who were in the I guess it's 2002 to 2008 or 2009, whatever that high school ran. And I'm still in touch with most of those young people there. And they're all doing, with only a couple of exceptions, wonderfully. Young people who had been given IEPs and were in special ed who are now who have completed their dissertation for their PhD, right? But they saw somebody believed in them. We took them out and gave them experiential education, service learning programs in Nicaragua, in Senegal, in Ghana, where they saw other parts of the world and learned to be more grateful about what they had here growing up, despite whatever challenges they had. And so, that's also what I'm proud of. I come down here and, I've been living in the Delta for a year. I'm in a double wide trailer, which is something I never thought I would have said. In a tornado zone where in the kind of housing where I'm 15 to 20 times more likely to die if a tornado hits, right? And it's a remote rural region and with everything that conjures up. And so I oftentimes have to take stock of, are you, and I still will have friends or corporate headhunters saying, look, you could be making 4 times as much money working with even more kids because it would be in an urban area and you wouldn't have to worry about tornadoes, right? So how do I value that kind of a move versus being down here for a region that has been historically traumatized by things like slavery, sharecropping, a 1927 flood that changed all the dynamics, manufacturing that left, resource extraction, human exploitation of labor, just historical, with families that had their dreams ripped from them and who were never able to pass on the ability to dream to succeeding generations, right? Is this a quixotic quest doing tilting at windmills by trying to work with these kids? The town I'm in, 45% persistent poverty rate. I pick up kids on Saturdays from a place that is an 86% persistent poverty rate. The highest maternal and infant mortality rates, the highest obesity rates, the lowest life expectancy. Does it make sense? Can I make a difference? I believe that the answer is yes. Am I doing it at a scale that everybody would appreciate? There are not going to be thousands of people necessarily affected immediately by the work that we do. But again, it's planting trees under whose shade other people will rest in. Not me, but other people. And so that's what I look forward to. So there are a number of things, whether it's that first school that's up and running, whether it's that girls' school in India, whether it's that independent high school for kids who had dropped out of high school, whether it's my time here, the work that I did in the prison for boys. I don't know. You can't follow them because they're teens. Some of them will never get out. But you have to hope that those boys who, instead of snow angels, we would make soil angels because I did vegetable gardening with them. And they immediately wanted to drop down and make the image of an angel in the soil. They were reminiscing about times either down, in this deep South in the States or had come across from another country, times where they had grown with grandparents, the food that sustained them. Who knows where that's going to carry them? The kids that I did breath work there, hopefully they will be able to find some peace. So it's hard for me to estimate, but it's, the butterfly effect that you hope you lay down those things. And I know people who are all about scale, all about replicability. I'm all about scales of humanity and individual touch, and the belief that some of these things that I've done will be passed on to these other people in their lives, as they have an example that they hadn't had in the past. So that doesn't exactly answer the question, but those are just some of the things that I'm gonna, when I put my head down finally to rest, that I'm gonna take with me.
I love that you say that, instead of about scale, you're about getting about the individual and touching humanity and making those personal touches that I believe, from a personal perspective, tend to have a stronger ripple effect because you developed a relationship. It's hard to develop relationships with like thousands and thousands or millions of, people, but you can make a much more deeper connection with, maybe a few hundred or, a smaller amount that tends to last for years and years because you got to know them as a person and not just a number. One of the things also that I've found with all the different experiences that you have had and the different schools that you've started and programs and organizations is that there always seems to be, and it's expected that it's going to be a challenge to get something started. That's expected. But it seems that the biggest barriers that I see that keep popping up in every time that you talk about a challenge that you face tend to come from the actual either communities or, or the people themselves. I guess why, and I've seen this as a theme, not just for you, but just across the board. Why is it so hard for people who need the help to help themselves? Why do you think that society makes it so hard for people to do that?
There's certain aspects of society where their job is to train people to be willing recipients of whatever the ethos is that's going to help that segment of government, for instance. It doesn't, for people to be individually liberated is not in everybody's best interests. And it pays to make people willing recipients of charity and largesse, as opposed to independent actors who are self-sufficient, who have their own personal agency. If you have people who start to question their circumstances, who start to push back and say, is this enough? Who start to ask, well, hold it. This school system that my child is in is at best an escalator, and I'm not even lucky enough to have that escalator go up. Let me step off and see if being schooled can be done differently. If education is in fact different, there's a larger group in society for whom it's in their best interest to maintain, again, that level of dependency. And that kind of unspoken relationship works out for both sides. People love us when we do food giveaways here. And when I ask for volunteers to, okay, well, let's either figure out ways where we can start a chicken coops for fresh eggs, where we can avoid the chickens getting killed by the chemical drift, which is another feature of the Mississippi Delta, or community vegetable gardens with the same deal, protecting and making sure that we have high level produce, so that and engage in conversations about what it means to eat well, and those hands don't go up. When I will say, I'm going to get up extra early on Saturday, because normally I'm working with the teens and letting them come to the gym where they can commune and be with one another, which is important. But for the younger kids, I'm going to create an early literacy program, science-based, for anybody who's concerned about their kids' reading ability now or in the future. Let's do this. And 3 Saturdays in a row, I'm the only one there with all my materials that I'm thinking I look cute with, right? It's that level of dependency is built in the Delta. It's the residue of a system of sharecropping, of slavery, of the biggest employer being a notorious prison, and people have been beaten down. And so I try to maintain compassion for those people, but we also have to have direct conversations where I'm not going to allow this to happen to your children and to your grandchildren. That's not why I'm here. And so that discussion continues. And it's one of the nice things about being able to pull out my Medicare card, because when people talk about, you don't know, you haven't been on earth as long as I have, like, you know what, I'm getting there. And I'm a senior citizen. So if you want to talk senior citizen to senior citizen and what our responsibilities are, let's have that conversation. But let's not just think that getting bingo prizes is going to be the end of the day for what my job is here. That's not what it's going to be. And it's why I went into something called the Yas Prize, which is in its third year, started by Jeff and Janine Yas, and it's for education. It rewards education innovation. And I'm like, well, who's going to pay attention to this small community center that hasn't even done, in terms of education innovation, what it's claiming it's going to do, which is create a network of micro schools. But I was urged to just go ahead, apply anyway. And so I had a second thought when I found out there were going to be 2,700 applicants. I still applied, and it was a multi-month process. It took a lot out of me, but we made it down to 33 out of 2,700, which got us a $200,000 grant and an incredible network and a way of thinking about education down here in the Delta that is going to make us some enemies, because, again, we are going to confront existing systems that nurture themselves and are a source of patronage for one another, and that have been part of the history here. And I get it. However, that's my job, is to disrupt that for the young people that I have sworn to work with since those days when I was a preteen. And so we're going to be creating a network of micro schools where kids are going to be engaged in the kind of learning that I've always tried to bring: project-based, experiential, where you meet the learner where they are, where you're going to take, cutting edge things like drones and robotics, but also combine them with traditional African-American quilting, with the blues, with the civil rights trail here, right? Because the town that I work in is the place where Emmett Till's body was prepared for transport back to Chicago. The trailer that I live in is in a county where the civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer was raised. So combining both the old and the new, but giving these young people a sense of their own power and their need to gain agency, self-sufficiency, and to project that power into the world and to reach back to the other kids in this community once they've moved on and moved forward are some of the things that we're taking on now.
You've brought up, I think, the biggest keys that I think that we need to look at for moving forward, or how change needs to happen. Because I was almost going to ask you the question about, do we really want change? Like, everybody's screaming change, but it could just be, I guess, a fad, right? Like the latest T-shirt. And so you've brought up things like, I think the biggest thing that I kept kind of feeling is that we need, now it's going to rhyme a little bit, that a healing needs to happen within people before they could even get to a point of thinking about real change, which takes place when you decide that you have self-agency, or that you can do this, that you can, dig deep inside of you and move forward. And so it is, this is what I've pulled from your conversation. That is a massive, massive, massive challenge because that requires the movement of 8 billion people and counting. And so for each person, if we really, really want change, is that we have to each do that healing journey, and then really, really dig deep. And then we have to kind of, I don't want to say forget, but we have to say, okay, we've learned some tough lessons from our past, not just here in the U.S., but across the world, because the things that you've, brought up were not just happening here in the U.S. They've happened in many countries around the world. And then we have to say, okay, we learned a lesson, or we know not to want to do that again. And that each of us, needs to just we gotta find that, I guess, bravado down deep.
Oh, so, I mean, there are a few things, right? I can't even talk about ancient philosophers in certain circles because it's not politically correct. However, I do that here, and there's a reason. But Aristotle said that courage is the most important virtue, because if you don't have courage, then all the other virtues don't matter. And you talked about it as well. And so that development of courage is one of the pieces of the foundation that has to be there, right? And so people need to get on that quest, and there are ways of doing that. There's also a concept in Japanese art called kintsugi. And so you have broken pieces of pottery that most people say, well, it's broken, let me throw it away. In this Japanese art, you take this gold lacquer and you put those pieces together and wrap this gold around it so that it's viewed as something even more beautiful than it was in its original shape. But it was broken, right? But now it's put back together, more beautiful than before. People have to understand that whatever else is going on in their lives, they can embrace this concept of kintsugi and put something back together again that's even more beautiful, even more profound. There's also something to the point of the number of people that this has to affect. There's a Columbia professor by the name of Erica Chenoweth who has something called the 3.5% rule. And through her studies, she has found that if you want to overthrow, nonviolently overthrow a society, you need to change the minds of just 3.5% of the population. So that's something that I hold in front of me down here in this small county and in this area of the Delta. And I think, again, that the butterfly effect, those kinds of things. And I think that 3.5%, yes, it has to start with people healing themselves. And then as they move beyond that, that kind of growth will happen. And I also do think, true, that, yes, people talk about change, and a lot of people, that's all they want to do is talk about it. I've had to remove myself from certain circles where, again, it's an overworked term at this point, but virtue signaling is more important than actual impact. And I've had to take myself out of some of those circles because, no, I'm not going to talk about, how this looks again in this echo chamber. Let's have an exchange of ideas. Let's figure out how we can move forward. It's why I'm going to be working with Ole Miss, the University of Mississippi, in a classics program. And I've had people say, why are you working with young black kids on classics? And I'm not going to go into it here, but if anybody wants to engage me offline, I'd be more than happy to talk about it. And it goes from everything from as simple as them understanding the Latinate roots of the words that are going to improve what are in fact right now the lowest ACT scores in the country, to understanding about certain essential verifiable truths that have lasted for thousands of years, that undergird any decent spiritual tradition or any place that has ever grown, right? And so the classics are as good a place as any to start. And I will certainly take the ancient, dead white philosophers that people sometimes deride over some of the current pundits that we have, who have not actually done anything in their lives other than criticize. So those are just a few things.
Yes, yeah, because I'm with you with the, like I mentioned, is change just the T-shirt that everybody wants because, you see it everywhere, we got to change this, we got to change that, yay. And like people literally will sometimes do that and go, yay, change. And it's, it becomes like a trend. You see it on these commercials, everything. It's like, it's a marketing component, right? And so, yeah, if we really want change, we got to do. It's going to be hard. It's as somebody was telling me, as they refer to everything, it's Iron Maiden work. So we got out there, put on our war gear because it's you got to fight with yourself inside, and then and then you're gonna have to fight outside. So. It doesn't mean that it can't have some elements of fun, but it's gonna be a grueling process that I don't know if a lot of people are up to in the society because they tend to, or at least nowadays, seem to get tired easily.
No, they really. So I'm sorry. Let me just that brings up a concept that and I kind of talked about it before with the wellness piece, but zest, right? How do you need zest to provide energy to your work, to your love relationships, all that, and again, right? The zest is developed through things like breath work, through things like exercise, through things like eating properly. But you're right, people don't necessarily have the energy for that, and some of it is at a basic cellular energetic level that people can work on, right? There are ways of doing it. You just have to make the decision to do it. And sometimes that means, all right, if I'm going to make space for that, what's the one thing I'm going to stop doing? And that might be spending as much time on social media or network news or in those echo chambers that I keep talking about. And instead substituting a more important personal practice that improves your zest so that you bring energy to the things that you claim are important to you. So that's important.
Yes. I just have 3 more questions for you. One of them is just a practical question, just because you've done so much. Do you pick your projects or do your projects pick you?
It's a little bit of both. I still run things through the filter of creativity, freedom, and service. And so I am open, and my spiritual beliefs allow me to, and some people will call it manifestation or whatever, but I remain open to what God brings me. I mean, that's being down in Mississippi. That chose me. Again, part of post-traumatic growth. February of 2022, I got a knock on the door, and some tattooed guy. And at this time, I had moved with my family to the Hudson Valley because I wanted my 2 youngest kids to see some grass and nature. And it was a good move. And this guy's the back door saying, "Look, don't shoot me, but I got something for you." I'm like, "It's 6:30 and let me finish my coffee. Why are you here?" And I eventually opened the door, and he says, "You've been served. She's tired of being married to you." He says, "I'm sorry," right? So a couple of decades of marriage were down the drain, and I at that point asked God in the universe, you fall down in a ball and cry out me, but no, that's not how I was raised. That's not what I had gone through. I asked God, "Where do you want me next?" And this position here was not well advertised, if at all. And if it was, it wasn't national, it was local. So I'm not sure how I came across it. And there were other options. And I had friends urging me to pursue those other options because I would remain up north, be better paid, closer to them and so forth. I get it, but this is what called me. And so it was a combination. I will also energetically during prayer and meditation put out feelers about what I'm supposed to do in a particular arena. And there's that. But it's remaining open to what God and the universe are asking of me. And that's what happened when I stopped practicing law. That was, again, another potentially traumatic occurrence. As I said, I lost friends around that because they knew that I was this Ivy League lawyer. And you're going to start a what? You're going to be a school teacher? But that's what called to me. I didn't say, let me stop practicing law, let me stop making this six-figure salary to try to raise money. And I started that school with $50,000, $25,000 from a professional gambler, and the other $25,000 was John F. Kennedy Jr., who was a schoolmate, a colleague in the district attorney's office, and a friend of mine got from what was then the fairly new Robin Hood Foundation. He got me the other $25,000 and stayed a supporter for years after that. But I didn't just say, you know what, let me start a school in East Harlem at a time where they're the highest recorded homicides on record in this city. No, that I was called to that. But there are certain other things that I will move towards more aggressively, but that's more on a tactical level.
Now, my next question is, if you were to start life again or all over, what would you do differently?
That's a good question. I don't think there's anything I would change. There's nothing I would change. I can't. I just know that I wouldn't have ended up here, for instance, if just the slightest deviation, whether it's in terms of professional relationships or romantic relationships, or I would have been somewhere else, but here is where I'm supposed to be. And I think it would have been a deviation from, and again, that kind of goes against saying, we have free will, and that there's a lot of debate around what actual free will looks like. But I'm comfortable with where I am and the level of free will I've been able to exercise through the choices that I've made. There are certain things I might have done a little quicker. I might have left the practice of law a little quicker. I might have changed certain relationships that I had with certain board members. But the overall path, there I don't think there's anything I would have changed.
Wow. Usually people have their lists, but that's wonderful that you are, I guess you've found that. One of the questions I had, but I thought you kind of answered it, was you've really found that, I guess inner contentment and ability to, still be objective yourself, but also have self-acceptance, which is, I guess the model that we need for really pushing forward for change. Now, my last question to help everyone is, how do you live an extraordinary life as an ordinary person?
By examining the things that you have reason to be grateful for, by figuring out who you are at your best, by understanding what allows you to be at your best. What is the environment? Who are the people? What are the steps that you take to be at your best? And just recreating that every day. And that every day you have the opportunity to be at your best. Doesn't matter what happened before. Doesn't matter what went on and the things that you might regret. A lot of it is that mindfulness aspect of being in the now, being present, and that you can always start over again. Each time you open your eyes, take that breath, feel where you are, and understand that you can start by being good to yourself, and then just one other person, and that effect and that energy will radiate. And if everybody were to do that, again, I think we would see a lot more cooperation, collaboration, safe conversations where people would be willing and able to share their challenges, their struggles, their hopes, their fears, and their dreams, and maintain your dreams, but figure out what's one thing you can do today to move yourself towards that dream. And there's a philosophy called WIN. It's an acronym for what's important now. So forget how you got sidelined. What's in front of you? What's important now? And what are you going to do to take that next step forward?
Perfect ending. Thank you, Hans, for your time and insight. To learn more about Hans Hageman, go to tutwilercommunityeducationcenter.org. If you have a passion for an unserved community, a social justice problem, or simply want to change minds, contact Project Good Work at projectgood.org to start your project of change today. It's that time again. The Changemaker Conference is happening again May 23rd, 2024. Register now at changemakerconference.com. Subscribe to our mailing list at projectgood.com/subscribe to get our episodes and blog articles sent to you each month. Plus, get a 10% discount on any project you start on projectgood.org. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Project Good. We're focused on what matters.